Thank you so much. I really appreciate that, and kind of a simplest, for lack of a better term, if any organization like your organization or the state sending that information to those of us that are working with community, saying share this immediately, ASAP, like that kind of messaging will grab
Yeah.
attention, and we'll make sure to communicate that. And I think Aisha and Zakia had their hands up.
Yeah, go ahead, Aisha.
I did have my hand up because I was going to ask about like the other channels that, and I thought you would address it. But I guess what I was going to say is even today, so my Amazon, whatever device I have, they send me messages all the time where it feels like I don't have to. I trust that this is a message that is important to me, and so I'm paying attention. I have never seen any other type of message, and I feel like if there were a way that we could connect with the
Hmm.
places that are pushing information to me anyway, because to be fair, I'm not going to add myself to that list because I have some severe anxiety that I manage very well. And I don't know that it would help me to hear everything. But like
Yeah.
them warning me that between Wednesday and Tuesday, there's going to be a storm. What about between Tuesday and Thursday? Don't go in the woods because whatever those diseases were, I don't know. That's where my mind is going. How can
Yeah.
we be more streamlined about the things that you feel like in Maine we should know about? I'm not from here. I'm not from another country, but I'm from what feels like another country when it comes to Maine. And so there are a lot of things that I don't know I'm supposed to know about. And so
Yeah.
the foundation of my question is, how can we utilize those places that are already pushing information to me when I don't want to actually add valuable information like this? And also, how can we make this more common knowledge and common stream? Because at my schools, they also give
Yeah.
information that I think there's so many announcements. If these announcements were included in that common knowledge, I think more folks would be attuned and would pay more attention. Okay, I'm done. Go ahead, Zakia.
Yeah, all amazing points, Aisha. I completely agree with you that streamlining of information is very important, especially with our folks, because we all get our information from different channels. A lot of our New Mainer folks get their information on like WhatsApp, for example, and that's not really utilized in a lot of these, public health spaces. So that's important to consider as well. But as important as information is, which of course, thank you so much, Rebecca and Molly. This is an amazing presentation, and I think we all learned so much. For a lot of the things, especially with what I kind of took away from these presentations, was that folks need actual, real, tangible things to be able to deal with the change in climates. And what really came to mind or jumped up at me was folks like our migrant workers or our Somali Bantu community who work in the farms and are really in the field literally when it comes to working in the heat and things like that. And I loved also, Rebecca, how you mentioned that folks don't want to leave their homes. I mean, Somalis historically are a nomadic people. We've moved around and we've been displaced and we've gone all sorts of different places on this planet, but a lot of us have really set roots here and we don't want to leave. We love Maine and we were Mainers ourselves. I know our executive director, Hebo, she calls herself an Ethio Mainer because she's Ethiopian, Somali, and she's a Mainer as well. So for folks who don't want to leave and have set roots here, literally and figuratively, are there avenues where they can be given things like protective gear that they can wear or financial resources to be able to get air conditioning in these buildings, because sometimes that's really what they need to be able to survive. As amazing as the information is, sometimes they don't have the capital to be able to really make a difference and survive in this weather, especially as it continues to change. And yeah, I'm just curious if that's something in the works or if that's something that we have to advocate for, because we're willing to do that as well.
Oh, that is such a good and complicated question. And thank you, Aisha, too, for your comments, which are super helpful and thoughtful. It's a it's a lot of really important and difficult issues, I think that are you've both raised, and areas where we know we have a lot of work to do, and there's a lot of ground to cover between what is and what could or should be, right? I would say most of what we do right now is in the universe of providing that better information, you know, doing the analyses ourselves to understand what the future climate is going to look like, and looking at the data that we have to see who we think is most at risk and what those impacts are likely to look like, and then turning that information into messages back to the community about what they need to know and how they can protect themselves. But when there's a gap between, you know, us providing that information and people being able to take it and do the things we hope they'll be able to do with that information, if they don't have the resources to do the protective things that we want them to be able to do, that's a problem. And it's not one that I think, it's not our traditional position necessarily. You know, our work usually ends near the end of that communication chain, and policy picks up, or the idea is that policy is supposed to pick up where we leave off. And you know, I think Molly's office, the governor's office of policy innovation in the future, has done a lot to get state dollars made available for things like home energy retrofits and heat pumps in people's homes to help them stay cool, grants for towns to be able to, you know, provide funding to residents to protect themselves, to get you know, broadly towns better prepared. But I think a lot of that is still done at the community or the town level, and there's not as much available, or at least my sense is it's a lot harder to get connected to resources for individual folks, for their own homes, for their own families, for their own jobs. And that, I think, is a big area of need. And you know, I don't have great answers. I wish I did, but I think it is absolutely where the work needs to go next, is figuring out how to get people where they need to be, how to help them get where they need to be if they don't have the resources themselves to get there.
I wanted to kind of raise a point and a question at the same time. It might not be phrased as a question, but Rebecca, during our little intro in our small group, you talked about how you're going to be talking about climate change and how it affects people's health, and you've been doing a great representation of that for all of us. The one thing I kind of just want to highlight is the Lyme disease during the summertime. And as Aisha mentioned, how, you know, our kids are not dressing for summer. As I call myself as a Mainer as well, as my colleague Zakia had said, even though I also an immigrant, I grew up in the woods in Maine. I camped, I did all of the Mainer activity, I would say. So I got taught those things through my camp counselors, you know, doing tick checks and wearing proper gear during the summer, and the bug sprays and all of that stuff, which is great. Not everybody has that access to that knowledge. And what is sad is not everybody can afford the testing for the autoimmune disease like Lyme disease. And not all of our our providers are familiar with Lyme disease presenting in minorities. So it presents differently in Black and African Americans. And so that is also a disadvantage for some folks. And we work with our community members that don't have main care or any kind of health insurance. So as we're working with the information you're sharing with us, doing our best, sharing that, doing education efforts and empowering to do preventative care, it also kind of hinders us if folks can take that message and go get screenings for Lyme and such, because they don't have health insurance. So can we flag that as a need for the state?
Absolutely.
I know you and Molly said you're recording a lot of questions and a lot of input that's being talked about today. So I want to see if the state could find any solution on how we can help folks in finding resources for free screening or qualify for people to be able to protect themselves when encountering those kind of inevitable summer diseases that they might not be aware of?
It's a really good question, and I am making a note of it. Thank you.
And likewise, all of these questions and comments are extremely helpful. We are writing them down. They will be shared with the Maine Climate Council itself. And I have a little bit more that I wanted to go through, and I'll do it quickly because I know that you all have other presentations. So I just wanted to touch on, we're going in a little bit of a different direction now. We've been having a great conversation about public health. And also there are other aspects of climate change that I think folks might want to know about and that also intersect with that. So really quickly, we know that climate change is caused by the burning of fossil fuels. So oil, gas, natural gas, fuel that we burn in our buildings and our cars and our trucks that goes into the atmosphere. It traps heat and it's making our planet warmer. And what we do at the Maine Climate Council is we look at where those greenhouse gas emissions come from. And a lot of them come from cars and trucks, which we all use to get around, and from our buildings. And so we look at, in addition to how we can prepare for climate change, what can our state do to reduce our impact on climate change? There are solutions that we are working on. I'll just go through a couple of them right now. We are trying to increase access to clean energy, so energy that comes from the sun and from the wind and does not burn fossil fuels. We want to make sure that communities in Maine have access to clean energy so that they can keep the lights on, keep the power running while not burning fossil fuels. This also involves creating more jobs in our state around clean energy. So looking at how are we training people to do the jobs that will help our state respond to climate change. So this is an example from a training program where I think it's a program for electricians where folks are learning how to install solar panels like the one you saw on the earlier slide. Looks like providing more places where electric cars can charge up so that people can drive cars that don't burn gasoline, can drive cars that use electricity, which is a cleaner fuel source. Also, we know that not everybody has their own car or wants their own car. And so it looks like improving public transportation options as well as biking and walking. This is a picture from, I believe it's Bath Ironworks. So workers that work at that huge shipbuilding facility, they have a bus now that they can use to get to work instead of driving their own cars. It also looks like expanding access to internet, because when folks have access to internet, they might not have to drive as far to go to work from home, study from home, attend events like this one on Zoom from home. Supporting access to green space. We haven't talked about this much, but we know that spending time in the outdoors helps people be healthier and can also provide a sort of an escape from hot weather when it's very, very hot. So this is North Deering Park in Portland, a park that was recently conserved, so it will stay a green park for the kids in the neighborhood to enjoy. Some things that people are doing in their communities to help respond to climate change. Sometimes they are demonstrating, which means telling the government what is important and what to advocate for. Also, sometimes it looks like growing your own food in your community, or on the bottom photo, those folks are building window inserts, which are helping people to stay warm in their homes. So that's one example of how a resource like a window insert can help somebody at home to stay warm during the cold winter months. I don't think we have time to have a ton of answers on this, but if you wanted to type in the chat, what does climate action look like for you in your community? I would be curious to hear what some folks are seeing as what people in your community would like to do more of or are doing to respond to climate change. We know that with all of the overwhelming information, sometimes it can cause anxiety. And one of the best ways to help people deal with that is to know what the small things they can do are that give them hope in a time of lots of information and anxiety. So if you want to just take a moment to share, what does climate action look like for you in your community? I also want to talk a little bit about culture, because climate change has impacts as well that we can't always see or measure. And culture is also an important part of our communities that might be at risk from climate impacts. But as we know, culture reflects values, knowledge. It might mean language, it might mean food, it might mean what we do for our livelihoods. Like you can see on the bottom, those people are harvesting, I believe those are oysters, to provide food for their community. So culture is lots of things that we can't quite measure. I wanted to quickly mention Indigenous nations, or Wabanaki nations in Maine, who have been here for many, many years and have a lot of deep knowledge of the land. Indigenous people in Maine and Wabanaki nations have experienced a lot of environmental collapse and species loss. And so we really rely on scholars from our Indigenous nations to provide us information and perspectives on how we can move forward in the future. Wabanaki citizens are particularly vulnerable to climate change, but we also know that they have cultural traditions that help to process change, as do many other communities. As you know, our cultural traditions can help us to deal with change. And then finally, just want to echo that your input is very important to us as we start to shape our future and how the state responds to climate change. I want to give time for the other presentations, so I think I'm going to skip through these questions pretty quickly and just end on, if you could tell us one bold action that Maine, our state, can do to address your community's priorities and needs, what would it be? And you can share more than one, but after what you've heard today, what is one bold action that Maine as a state can take to address your needs and priorities? If you could put those into the chat or raise your hand and share, we would very much appreciate it. And then I'll turn it over to the other presenters.
Thank you, Molly. I just wanted to read, as people are adding their answer to this question, there's a chat that is asking if there could be more resources available to immigrant owners to install a green energy system, windows, or additional solar system. I know we talked about that earlier, how people can make these changes in their homes to install the heat pumps or solar systems to help with that. Can you see if can you talk about if there are more resources for homeowners as well as for those that are renting that possibly can't make those modifications?
Yes.
Landlord's limitation.
Yes, absolutely. And I will, after I close the slides, I'll put some links in the chat. There are rebates and incentives available for people that own their homes and landlords to install heat pumps, which can help you stay warm in the winter and can also provide air conditioning in the summer. So a lot of people are really relying on heat pumps now because they provide both heating and cooling, and they cost less to run than oil or gas heating systems. So yes, we do have rebates available to install those. The challenge, as you mentioned, Salam, is that some people do not own their homes. So if you rent your home, typically the landlord is the one that needs to make that decision to put in a heat pump and to receive the rebate. But your landlord can receive a rebate if they install a heat pump in your home, in the apartment or the home that you live in. They can get money for that. And so landlords do have an incentive to do it. but that is something that needs to be advocated for. And we work with landlords, we advocate for landlords to do it. And also the more voices that are encouraging landlords to do this, the more common it will be. Thankfully, we are seeing that a lot of the new affordable housing, the larger apartment buildings and affordable housing that is being built in Maine has air conditioning. Increasingly, it is becoming a standard to have both heating and cooling. However, a lot of people live in homes that are not new, are older homes that need to be what we call retrofitted. So that is something that needs advocacy, and there is money available for rebates. And I will put that in the chat, absolutely. Great question. And the same goes for solar panels. There is also money for solar panels, but again, the landlord typically has to make the decision to do that. However, we are working on with some federal funding. We are hoping to receive a bunch of money to allow renters more access to affordable solar. It's called the Solar for All program. It's coming from the federal government, and we are crossing our fingers that we will receive funding for that soon. So I hope I have more positive news to share in a few months on that. Great question.
And I'll just add in, if I can, this really is only a good resource for helping folks keep their homes warm in the winter. But a little bit higher up in the chat, I threw in a link for an organization called Window Dressers of Maine, and they are fantastic. Their mission is to provide any renter or homeowner around the state who lives in an older home with leaky windows and is having trouble heating their home during the winter. They will custom measure and build for those homeowners window inserts that better insulate the home. They're free. I think what they ask is you have to sign up to request that, and they'll help do measurements. What you do in return is you help build them, or help build window inserts for someone else. They have these sort of community days where everybody comes together, builds a whole bunch of these inserts that are custom measured for any home in the community that needs them, and they're wonderful. It's a great resource, and I know that they're always looking for more families to help, that more places where they can get these inserts in and get people's warmer in their homes and spending less money on their heating in the winter.
I love in the chat, Rosa wrote about transportation infrastructure, dense housing, walkable communities. The Climate Council is talking about this. I think they have a meeting next week to talk about this. So it is absolutely on their minds. And the fact that you wrote it will just give more reinforcement that that is a very important action that we can take. So I want to leave time for the other folks that have important information to share. I'm sure we can send these slides out after, and there's some slides in the end of the presentation that I didn't share that have links where you can share more feedback and you can learn more about all of these resources. So I'm sure we will get those out to you after the presentation.
Thank you so much, Molly and Rebecca. I think I can speak for everyone saying this was a very enriching, engaging presentation. I know I learned a lot. I think we're all walking away with some new information, and I really appreciate that. Thank you so much for being here with us. I know we had a couple of presentations from our fellow CHWs. So we're gonna just kind of skip around, and I will have my colleague Laden introduce herself and share her screen to tell us a little bit more about some of the things that we experience in Maine due to climate change. A lot of this information have been touched upon already, so this is going to be a little bit of a brush up. And then after, we will have a breakout session so that we can kind of digest and talk about what really resonated with all of us. So, Laden, I'll give the floor to you.
All right. Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining today's Zoom. My name is Lada Mohammed, and I'm a CHW at New Mainers Public Health Initiative. Today, we will go over the necessary strategies to make sure that we're all prepared in the event of an emergency. So I'll just go through recent challenges that occurred in the state of Maine, and we'll cover topics such as Maine winter storms, floods, and general winter preparedness. So as we navigate through these recent challenges and potential threats, it becomes more and more important for us to supply ourselves with the knowledge that is necessary to reduce the impact of emergency events in order to keep ourselves safe. Part of accomplishing this involves having the right resources, which is why toward the end of this presentation, there will be a list of resources, local and state resources. Additionally, it's important to empower ourselves and our communities with the ability to face emergency situations with a sense of resourcefulness and preparedness, which is the goal of this presentation. All right. Okay. So I'll begin by first introducing emergency preparedness and what it involves. The definition of emergency preparedness is the steps taken to ensure safety and resilience in the face of unexpected events like natural disasters, accidents, or acts of violence. Emergency preparedness is a crucial skill to have due to the fact that we are always at risk of being affected by an emergency, no matter where we go. As we all know, in Maine in particular, we had a few recent major emergency events. In the face of situations like those events, it's important to be able to utilize your skills and knowledge in order to mitigate the impact of the situation. During acts of violence, natural disasters, accidents, etc., we need to be able to ensure that we're prepared. So as mentioned, in Maine, especially in the Lewis and Auburn area, we have recently faced challenges regarding emergency events in the past few months. One of those events being the mass shooting that took place in October. This was a very tragic event that resulted from a senseless act of violence. This event in particular had a large impact on not just the Androscoggin County community, but the entirety of the state of Maine and even local states. The impact of this event were on our community safety and our overall mental health. Everyone was in a state of panic and fear. Multiple cities in Maine and even places in other states were shut down as a result of the risk we were facing. The other event is the floods that occurred throughout the state in January of this year. These floods also had a widespread impact on communities throughout the state, including our Androscoggin County community. The floods resulted in many people's homes being damaged and destroyed, which led to a large number of people being displaced from their homes. Others faced the loss of electricity as a result of the power outages and the damage on power lines. A lot of food had to be thrown away as a result of coming into contact with floodwater. And lastly, there was property damage, which affected not only homes, but also vehicles and land. As a northeastern state, winter storms are very common in the state of Maine. According to Maine's Emergency Management Agency, the entire state is quite susceptible and vulnerable to severe winter storms every winter. We receive a lot of heavy snowfall, snow combined with high winds, freezing rains, and ice storms. This is something that we're all knowledgeable of. However, what may not be common knowledge are the types of snowstorms. So the most common types are blizzards, ice storms, sleet storms, and just snowstorms in general. The first casualty that may happen as a result of these storms are dangerous roads. Snowstorms tend to be a recipe for dangerous roads and car accidents. It is estimated that almost 25% of motor vehicle weather-related crashes are caused by snow, slush, or ice every year. In order to reduce the risk of injury while driving, it's important to reduce your speed. The reason why is because you'll have the ability to pay more attention to road conditions, other drivers, and pedestrians. Driving slower will lessen the chances of losing control of your vehicle as a result of ice. Additionally, you should keep a safe distance from other vehicles on the road. The recommended distance is 8 to 10 seconds to close the gap between yourself and the car in front of you. More distance will allow time to make a stop or a safe maneuver in case of a sudden emergency or the car in front of you suddenly stopping. The second casualty is hypothermia. Hypothermia is defined as the condition of having an abnormally low body temperature, typically one that is dangerously low. Some of the warning signs of hypothermia are uncontrollable shivering, memory loss, disorientation, incoherence, slurred speech, drowsiness, and apparent exhaustion. One of the easiest ways to detect hypothermia is to check someone's temperature. If a person's temperature is below 95 degrees Fahrenheit, you need to seek medical attention for this individual immediately. But in the event that you're unable to get medical attention during a snowstorm, you can begin by warming a person's body core first, getting them in dry clothing, and wrapping them in a warm blanket covering their head and neck. It's very important not to warm the legs or the arms first because this will cause cold blood from the legs and arms to move toward the heart, which can lead to heart failure. Hypothermia can be avoided by wearing proper weather attire. It's important to put on thick, warm clothing and layers in order to stay warm. It's also important to have hand and feet protection like gloves and boots and warm headgear as well. Winter damages are another casualty. It can include damage to property such as the infrastructure of your home or your car or your land. Common winter damages include damaged roofs, damaged driveways, knocked down power lines on property, and etc. Typically, these damages are caused by trees falling down or extreme winter winds. Some ways to prevent excessive damage to property in the winter involves insulating your homes, caulking, and weather stripping them so as to keep out the harsh cold and the winds. So a flood is defined as an overflowing of a large amount of water beyond its normal confines, especially what is normally dry land. There are various different types of floods. One of the most common in Maine is a flash flood. Flash floods are caused by heavy or excessive rainfall in a short period of time, but they can also occur even if no rainfall has happened because of a dam failing or after a sudden release of water by debris or ice jam. Another common type of flood is a coastal flood, which is caused by higher than average tide, and it is worsened by heavy rainfall and onshore winds. During floods, one of the potential casualties that could be faced is a power outage. During a power outage, it is important to identify and throw away food that may have gone bad during the outage time. The same applies to medication that needs to be refrigerated, unless the label says otherwise. It's also important to check with local authorities to see if your tap water is still drinkable. You should also avoid fallen power lines. For instance, if a power line were to fall on your car, it's advised to stay in the vehicle and avoid touching metal within the car. Unless there's an immediate threat, like the car catching on fire, then it's best to exit the car. Another casualty is hydroplaning. Hydroplaning is defined as when a vehicle slides uncontrollably on the wet surface of a road due to a loss of traction from a layer of water building between the wheels of the vehicle and the road surface. In order to lessen the chances of hydroplaning on the road, it's important to make sure that your vehicle maintains proper tire pressure. Tires that have low air pressure are more likely to hydroplane, whereas tires that have high air pressure are more likely to lose traction in general. And the last casualty is flood damage. This can be caused by roads. This can occur to roads. And in terms of floods damage, that can be avoided by essentially trying to lessen your speed while driving and being more attentive to the road in order to avoid things like potholes, which can be caused by flood damage. And now we're going to speak about winter preparedness because in Maine, we face the winter regardless. It's important to have skills that will aid you in being prepared for winter. One way to prepare for the winter months is to salt your driveways, porch, sidewalks, and more. Salting will prevent the ice and snow from bonding to the pavements. This will make it easier to shovel and plow your driveway. In addition to that, it will decrease the risk of slipping on ice or slush because the salt will melt the snow and ice on contact. Another way to prepare for the winter months is to keep a small shovel in your car. Keeping a small shovel in your car will become helpful in instances where your car gets stuck in ice or snow, or you're in a sudden emergency and you need to dig yourself out. Lastly, you need to keep blankets in your car because they can be useful when you may get stranded in cold weather or in situations like medical emergencies. Thick wool blankets in particular can be used to gain traction for a slipping tire to get unstuck. You just have to place the wool under the wheel, and that could potentially aid it in getting it unstuck. And you can winterize your car in general by inspecting your tires and making sure that they're in the right condition for the weather. You can test your battery to make sure that it's in good condition and will not have a likelihood of dying in the winter months. It's also very important to monitor your brakes as you don't want them failing when you need to use them most. Lastly, you need to make sure to add proper coolant and regularly change the oil in your car. The most important part is staying informed, however. During environmental emergencies or poor weather conditions, it's important to stay informed for safety reasons, but even prior to these emergencies happening, it's important to get in the habit of checking the local news station or weather apps, as they will often alert you about incoming bad weather well before it happens. The cell phone weather app is an important tool in staying informed because it's quick and an easy way. All you have to do is just go to the weather app on your phone, set it to your location, and check the weather. It's also very important to check your local news stations. That's something that, for those who may not do it regularly, you can discover by just Googling the news stations. Lastly, these are available resources that can be utilized in order to get assistance in the state of emergency. The Lucent Emergency Management Agency coordinates and different response efforts and provides information during emergencies. And of course, the state of Maine, their official website offers different emergency preparedness resources and updates. You can check in with your local shelters to get contact information for in the event of evacuations or displacements. You can also check in with your local food banks and assistance programs to get support if you're affected by food spoilage, like earlier when I mentioned water getting in contact with your food. And there's also various transportation services, which are alternatives for those without functioning vehicles. Of course, environmental emergencies can lead to devastating effects on mood regulation and mental health. Even in the state of emergencies, it's still important to consider how you're doing emotionally after making sure that you're physically safe. One way to make sure that you're getting the emotional support that you need is by joining community support groups. This can be done by reaching out to local community support networks, such as organizations or local clubs that can offer these emotional support services and practical assistance. Another method is to get help by reaching out to different mental health services. You can do that by getting in contact with a counselor or therapy, which will allow professionals to aid you in coping with trauma and stress. A third method is to create an emergency kit. It can consist of supplies such as food, water, first aid, and flashlights. These resources are important because they can be very hard to access in the event of an actual emergency. For families, it's important to create an emergency family plan. For families with children in particular, family emergency plans can be helpful in teaching your children what to do in the event of an emergency, and it's important to have a designated emergency meeting spot in case the family gets split up, and the children will basically know how to relocate and reconnect with the family. The fifth method is to stay informed, as previously mentioned. You can sign up for local news alerts, important city alerts, which will bring your attention to environmental emergencies. You can also do research to stay updated on emergency protocols so that you're always aware of the best actions to take during an emergency. And you can research emergency resources, which were provided in the previous presentations, that can aid you in the event of emergency. It's also important to engage in emergency preparedness activities. They're a good way of practicing safety measures so that you know exactly what to do in the event of emergency. You can practice stimulation exercises with family and friends. These exercises include practicing in emergency drills or stimulations to practice response protocols. Another method is to take part in volunteer opportunities in local organizations or shelters that offer disaster relief efforts, because they'll teach you about different response protocols. And then here are more resources that you could potentially use in order to get aid in the event of an emergency. And that is the end of the presentation. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Aladdin, for that information. I know Zakia and I and Aisha and other folks were keeping up in the chat of some of the tips that you were sharing with us. I have used a couple of them, and some of them were new to me. So as Gracia have mentioned, this is amazing for new Mainers, but as well, I had stated for even mainstream Americans that are still every season getting used to the winter in Maine or winter in New England. So thank you so much for that information. I did share in the chat the FEMA link for emergency preparedness for folks that would like to save that. It's the printable PDF form for you guys to take it home, fill it out with your families, and do some kind of drill at the house, or make sure to have a to-go bag in your trunk for the winter time and also for the summertime to keep healthy. So I wanted to take a moment to immediately send all of us into a breakout room so that we can kind of talk about what resonated with us and chat a little bit. And so Zakia, I will have you put us into a breakout room. That way we can kind of digest a little bit. So I will see you all back out here.
Yeah.
Welcome back, everyone. I know that wasn't a lot of time.
Yeah.
In the breakout rooms. I know we have 2 more days of this amazing event. Tomorrow we have our new tools and innovation Zoom, the same time, 10 a.m. to 12 p.m. I hope that you guys will join us as well and have an amazing discussion. And thank you so much for everyone. Thank you, Aisha. And I hope you have a wonderful afternoon and stay safe and stay warm for the upcoming storm.
Thank you so much, everyone. Have a great rest of your day.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thank you.